Amazing. Welcome everyone to the Connecting the Dots, Ammonia, Hydrogen, and Environmental Justice webinar. My name is Taylor Ward, she, her pronouns, and I am the Senior Manager of Communications and Education at Just Solutions. I am calling in from Yucat's land, also known as Fresno, California. For those who don't know, Just Solutions is a national organization that drives innovative, equitable solutions to the climate crisis in support of healthy, resilient communities and accountable democratic institutions. We ground our work in the broader movement for environmental justice and the guiding principle that frontline communities most harmed by climate change should lead in creating and implementing solutions. Please feel free to add your name, your organization, and where you're located in the chat so we can know who else is on the call. Just Solutions acknowledges that we occupy the stolen land of Turtle Island, home to countless Native tribes and nations. We recognize the ongoing struggles and violence Indigenous communities face and honor Indigenous knowledge, wisdom, and activism. We are committed to supporting justice for Indigenous communities by reflecting this conviction in our work. You can check out native-land.ca to find out whose land you're on and to find more tools to support Native advocacy in your area. The purpose of today's webinar is to explore the historical context of ammonia, its present-day applications, and its significant implications for achieving environmental justice goals. We will also discuss the role it plays in the development of several technology-based environmental solutions, including hydrogen hubs and carbon capture and storage. If you have any questions throughout today's event, please feel free to use the Q&A box, and then we'll be able to incorporate your questions into the Q&A period at that time. Now to introduce today's speakers, who we are super excited to hear from. We will be hearing from Caitlin Joshua, the Louisiana Gulf Coast campaigner at Earthworks, where she works to stop the build-out of petrochemical, oil, and gas infrastructure in Louisiana. Caitlin's experience includes co-leading the No Formosa Finance Coalition, serving as one of the petrochemical working group leads for Break Free from Plastics, and continuing to serve as the lead organizer in Ascension Parish, working to stop carbon capture and storage, where she engages communities on how to plug into the fight and advocate for real alternatives in her beloved state. We will also hear from Taylor Hodge, U.S. Agrochemicals and Fossil Fuels campaigner at the Center for International Environmental Law. Her work encompasses connecting key stakeholders and movements to protect food systems, strengthen agricultural policies, and address public health concerns around agrochemicals and fossil fuels. Taylor previously worked in New Orleans, Louisiana, and Yerevan, Armenia, furthering movements for environmental, economic, and electoral justice. And I will now turn it over to Taylor to get us started.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Taylor. What if I told you that 5 of the top 10 most polluting facilities proposed for build-out in the US were actually ammonia facilities? I'm here today to talk to you about ammonia production, a truly looming and urgent threat for the US and the world. So here is a sneak peek at a emissions analysis report that CL will be coming out with hopefully this summer, fingers crossed. So in this report, our team analyzed the emissions potential of 71 of the 118 proposed petrochemical projects in the US. And of those top 10 projects, which actually make up half of the total emissions of all of the projects, so clearly dominated by mega projects. But of those top 10 most polluting projects, 5 are actually ammonia facilities. And if all of these ammonia facilities, not just these top 5, but all of them across the board, were to be built, that could nearly quadruple ammonia capacity in the US from around 14 million tons to 54.5 million tons. And unfortunately, up to 95% of these proposed ammonia facilities are based on fossil gas feedstocks, which, if built, could entrench us into a future of fossil fuel dependence. As you can see here, circled in red, some of these facilities are called ammonia facilities, but some are under other titles. Clean Hydrogen Works, for example, Clean Energy Facility, fertilizer plant, etc. And we'll get into a little bit more of why that is. So, some facilities are producing ammonia, but it's almost as if they're in disguise. They're being called clean or blue hydrogen facilities, fertilizer facilities, and also clean energy facilities. So why is that happening? Facilities that plan to make ammonia are sometimes naming themselves names that have to do with their end uses. So for example, ammonia is the key ingredient for all nitrogen fertilizers. And there's also a big hype around hydrogen right now. The Biden administration is investing $8 billion in public funds for hydrogen hubs and hydrogen projects. And ammonia could be used as a hydrogen carrier because, as you can see, NH3 H is the hydrogen part. So ammonia is made out of hydrogen and nitrogen. But a lot of the speculative uses, like for energy, they're speculative. So we'll see how that pans out for industry. Not to get ahead of ourselves, let's talk a little bit about ammonia and its history. During the 19th century, the main source of fertilizer was actually guano, so bird poop from tropical islands. But at the beginning of the 20th century, supplies were running low, and so an alternative was needed. In 1909, German chemists Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch synthesized ammonia, and then it was used by the Germans during World War I as a fertilizer and also for explosives. So Haber, the chemist, got the Nobel Prize in chemistry for synthesizing ammonia, but his work led to the creation of chemical weapons. And that was on ammonia, but also on his other chemical work, and the eventual suicide of his wife and fellow chemist Clara Haber for moral reasons. And ultimately, Haber, being Jewish himself, had to flee Germany during World War II. And worst of all, some of his Jewish relatives were put in concentration camps and killed by the same chemical weapons that he had worked to produce. So a truly sobering story about the history of ammonia. And unfortunately, it does not stop there. Ammonium nitrate, which is an ammonia derivative and a common fertilizer, has also caused explosions and terrible accidents, acts of terrorism around the world. One example is on the top left-hand corner, the West Texas explosion. This was in 2013. A fertilizer depot caught fire, and this explosion killed 15 people, injured 260 people, and leveled more than 120 buildings. And it did show up on the Richter scale for earthquakes. On the top right-hand corner, you can see the Beirut blast. This was in Beirut, Lebanon in 2020. Stored ammonium nitrate exploded, killing more than 200 people, injuring more than 6,000, and leveling buildings, which left over 300,000 people homeless. And lastly, although this is certainly not the last of terrible explosions with ammonium nitrate, is the Oklahoma City bombing. This was an act of domestic terrorism that killed over 150 people. So it's clear that ammonia and its derivatives are dangerous and can be a national security threat. Ammonia itself, in its most pure form, is also toxic and deadly. Anhydrous ammonia, or the purest form of ammonia, is a toxic gas at room temperature. It's also a common fertilizer that actually needs to be injected into the ground. But leaks during transportation and at facilities have killed people and wildlife. In the top left-hand corner, an example, very sad leak in 2023 from a truck crash carrying anhydrous ammonia, killed 5 people, including a young family, and 500 people in the surrounding area had to be evacuated. And in the top right-hand corner, ammonia spills killing fish. This was a spill at a facility, an ammonia facility in Iowa, that killed more than 750,000 fish. So truly very toxic to both surrounding communities as well as wildlife. So, fertilizer is not the innocuous plant food that we've grown up hearing about. The vast majority, though, of ammonia, about 80%, is produced for fertilizers. And the rest of it is used for industrial processes and products, including synthetic fibers, pharmaceuticals, cleaning products, etc. But currently, all ammonia is made out of fossil fuels. And while it can be made from renewables, that has yet to happen at scale and is also very expensive. I'm going to explain the most commonly used process to make ammonia. First, it's using a fossil gas feedstock, methane, also called natural gas. So that gas is blasted with steam through a process called steam methane reforming, and this separates the methane into CO2 and hydrogen. The hydrogen is then mixed with nitrogen from the air via the energy-intensive Haber-Bosch process, so named after our chemists, and that creates ammonia. But it's really important to remember that hydrogen is always a part of the ammonia synthesizing process, and ammonia itself is made of hydrogen and nitrogen. Okay. There's been a lot of talk about the different colors of hydrogen and of ammonia, blue, green, pink, to name a few. But regardless of the color, all of the different versions of the hydrogen and ammonia rainbow are chemically the same, and the color just refers to the production process. So we're going to focus on blue hydrogen and blue ammonia because that is the concerning proposed build out that we're seeing. When it comes to blue ammonia and blue hydrogen, it's also called by industry clean hydrogen or clean ammonia, but it's clearly not clean because it's made from methane gas, also called natural gas, which is, of course, a fossil fuel. The reason why it's being called clean by industry is because of the addition of carbon capture and storage, CCS. So I'm going to bring you back to when I was explaining the process. Remember how during the steam methane reforming, the methane is separated into CO2 and hydrogen. That's the part where industry says they will capture that CO2 and store it underground, hence carbon capture and storage. However, we know that is fraught with many problems and untruths. CCS has not been proven to work at scale. It's incredibly expensive as well as dangerous. And if we allow this to happen, this could really entrench us into using fossil fuels for decades to come. I will say that we're not the only ones who are saying or who are believing that this is a false solution, because DSMOG did some great reporting on this, but essentially there was some recent regulations in Canada around greenwashing. And oil and gas industries there have begun removing carbon capture and storage mentions from their websites. So it's clear that we're not the only ones who think that this is a bit too good to be true. Okay. So if it's so dangerous, expensive, why is this blue ammonia / blue hydrogen build out happening? And please note on this map, this shows some of the proposed facilities coming for blue ammonia in the US, including the largest proposed facility, if it were to be built to its full capacity, in Adams Fork, West Virginia. So you can see that the map is showing heavy build out in states that already have a history of fossil fuel industry or currently producing fossil fuels and chemicals and have a history of environmental injustice and pollution. And that is Texas, Louisiana, as well as West Virginia. Unfortunately, the reason why this build out is happening is in massive part due to federal funding. So there's $8 billion in Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, from the Biden administration for hydrogen hubs across the US. In addition to that $8 billion, there are also generous tax credits for, quote, clean hydrogen under the 45V tax credit, as well as for carbon capture and storage, CCS, under 45Q. While this is supposed to help build out clean industries across the US, it's clear that that's not really what is happening. And unfortunately, these facilities are not just the facilities in and of themselves, but they come with a ton of related infrastructure and resource drains. And this includes potentially LNG pipelines to fuel the fossil gas for the facilities and the feedstock for the products. There might also be gas power plants because these facilities need so much power. There's, of course, the ammonia production, which we know is heavily toxic. The potential of ammonia pipelines, which could be very dangerous. And we've already seen how transporting ammonia can be dangerous and deadly. And then, of course, the carbon capture and storage and carbon injection sites, and also potentially CO2 pipelines, which are very dangerous and have already proven to be so. And I think there will be likely more information on that in the next presentation. And I will also say there's a huge water penalty for blue hydrogen and blue ammonia facilities. To be honest, they should be called blue because of how much water they need, because they're looking at a 20-to-1 water penalty. So if we increase ammonia capacity in the US by millions of metric tons, that could be billions of tons of fresh water. Which would be a huge drain on surrounding communities, especially because so many of these are proposed to be mega projects, which need large amounts of resources to meet their huge production capacity. And speaking of water, while ammonia is currently used mostly for fertilizer, which you can see in this bottom teal section, there's also speculation about ammonia being used in other industries, like for shipping and also for power generation, and as we've said, a hydrogen carrier. So these are projections, and what you can see mostly around and after 2030, this large area of, I guess, like a lighter blue color for shipping, that's actually for ammonia ships, so ammonia powered ships. And that could be really dangerous because that would mean more ammonia potentially getting into our oceans and our waterways. So currently, only 10% of ammonia is traded internationally, so that's a fairly small amount. But there's plans to ship ammonia overseas for uses, as I said, in power generation and also as a hydrogen carrier, mostly for European and Asian markets. So here's some industry graphic for ideas of sending blue ammonia from Texas to those markets. With plans to significantly increase ammonia international trade and ammonia as a fuel for ships, this really opens the door to a host of ocean pollution issues with ammonia. So ammonia is definitely a major threat to oceans and coastal livelihoods. First of all, agricultural runoff from fertilizers, namely ammonia, is one of the leading causes of waterway pollution in the US. And you can see this big algal bloom on the left-hand side that is fed by nutrients from fertilizers like ammonia. And so it's the leading cause of waterway pollution in the US and also is a huge reason for the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, which I'm showing on the bottom right hand. This is an area essentially devoid of aquatic life, spanning thousands of cubic miles. Additionally, and lastly, on the top right-hand corner, shipping ammonia is risky. Here's an example from this year of an attack on a ship carrying ammonia fertilizer. And experts have said that these spills or similar spills to this have the potential to potentially sterilize cubic miles of ocean, which is really scary to think about when we consider the potential increase of international ammonia trade, as well as ammonia being used as fuel for boats. Okay, and lastly, even less progressive organizations, institutions like the National Petroleum Council say that by far, renewables and efficiency are the most important aspects of the transition, with CCS and things like fuel switching being a much smaller portion. So our resources, and especially our public funds, like your and my tax dollars, are much better served for projects in renewables and in efficiency by far. So it's important that we're just not allowing for these escape hatches for the fossil fuel industry, like carbon capture and storage or blue hydrogen and ammonia, because they're not even shown to be essential to the transition, even by organizations that you would assume would support that kind of thing. So I will close by saying we deserve real solutions, not dangerous fossil fuel falsehoods. I'm working on that alliteration. I'm workshopping that, but thank you so much. Once again, I'm Taylor Hodge with CL, the Center for International Environmental Law, and you can reach me either in the chat with your questions or also at thodge@cl.org. Thanks so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Taylor. That was really great, really informative. I learned a lot. We are next going to be hearing from Caitlin Joshua, who will be sharing more about her work in Louisiana. So I will pass it over to you, Caitlin.
Thank you. Sorry about that, y'all. I had to find a spot that was away from my kids. And so Taylor, I'll let you share the PowerPoint. Give me just a second. I'm just going to move my son one second.
Yeah, of course. Take your time. And if you have any questions, I already see some coming in the chat. Please feel free to add them to the chat or add them to the Q&A. And then if you have any links or work that you're working on that you think would be interesting to folks, also feel free to share that, and we'll compile a list of all of the resources and share that back out once we share the follow-up email.
Well, thank y'all so much for your patience. My babysitter's here to save the day, but just wanted to get her squared away. So my name is Caitlin Joshua, and I have the pleasure and honor of working with Taylor as well, both Taylors, in some capacity in trying to stop not just petrochemical build out, but solely working against agrochemicals, and most importantly around stopping CCS, carbon capture and storage in South Louisiana. As a resident of South Louisiana, as a native of South Louisiana, this entire build out is extremely alarming and something that we are really, folks are really kind of waking up to and really understanding what's at stake here. And so we can start off with the first slide, Taylor. And so Earthworks is the nonprofit organization that I work for around environmental justice. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting communities and the environment from the adverse impacts of mineral and energy development. I like to say, short and sweet, we are about a just transition in the state of Louisiana and helping folks understand what environmental justice and environmental racism really is through the lens of, I always say, organized through a racial lens. And next slide, sorry. And so I wanted to start off, like, one of the things that we are going to talk about on this call or during my presentation is the environmental impacts, right? The kind of like the environmental justice lens that we organize from within Ascension Parish, St. John, St. James, in particular in the parish that I reside in Ascension. There's been a lot of just alarming news articles that have come out this year, studies, and one of those being the Louisiana Cancer Alley study that was done by Antonia Juaz. If you don't know her, she's phenomenal, works with Human Rights Watch, and essentially she spent months upon months, but also a few years in South Louisiana trying to really understand just the gravity of the situation around fossil fuels, how that plays into maternal health care, how that plays into Black maternal health, and some of the alarming rates that we've seen around morbidity rates. And what's been so wild, and I feel like it's just kind of busting at the seams this year, is there have been several different law clinics within the state of Louisiana and at large United States that have come out with studies that basically speak to this larger issue around Cancer Alley, not just the effects of, which is already devastating, right? The amount of alarming rates that come out of Cancer Alley as it relates to cancer or respiratory illnesses, but also low birth weights and women that are being diagnosed with fertility issues as a result of living within the 70-mile corridor radius of Cancer Alley, which is deemed between Baton Rouge all the way to New Orleans, stopping, of course, in Ascension, St. James, and St. John. And so I'll make sure that you all, again, like Taylor Ward said, has access to the resources and any of the tools and studies that I mentioned throughout this presentation. But one of the main ones I wanted to focus on when talking about environmental impacts, we knew within the last 10 years, 20 years, there were just very alarming studies to be developed out of Louisiana and the South in particular around the cancer rates, but now we are seeing just so many people dedicating their time and energy, scientists that are doing the work to really sound the alarm on the environmental effects around maternal health care, which is really important. And in my personal capacity, really something that I care about. And so it's been really interesting to watch all that kind of come about. And I'll make sure you guys have access to this study. Next slide. And then, of course, like just speaking more into, babies born in Louisiana, the Cancer Alley way less at birth, and just essentially how that is playing a role in how we are going to the Louisiana Department of Health. We are going to the different bodies that are responsible, or agencies that are responsible for overseeing a great deal of these other national agencies, and how that plays a role in how we're really taking on petrochemical build out in South Louisiana from here on out. We've really seen that narrative change around, as long as we're wealthy, as long as we benefit financially from these plants, it's kind of shifting away from that narrative to, oh goodness, you're killing us, and what more can we do around that? How can we look at other alternatives around a just transition, around a green economy that really speaks to some of the natural resources that Louisiana is blessed to have, right? And so we really, especially since these last studies have come out, have seen a great deal of organizations and activists and residents pushing back on this narrative of we are okay with being poisoned as long as we are making money. And so that's just been really something to kind of lift up. Next slide. And then I just put some recent pictures up here. Recently attended a maternal health care conference where essentially the idea was to organize around environmental justice and like using our intersectional work to be able to develop a plan where we can have conversations and build out town hall meetings and really educate the community on what they can do in this moment around stopping petrochemical build out, namely carbon capture and storage, just because we know we are slated for so many different plants. And I know that Taylor went into grave detail and has mentioned a great deal of information around kind of the chemistry of what that could potentially mean for a South Louisiana that is already inundated with so many different facilities. And so really just trying to do the work to marry some of the things that we care about around maternal health care, since our rates are so terrible in Louisiana, along with our Cancer Alley rates. How can we work with organizations to move us forward with a strategy that makes sense and that works in real time and expedites this timeline that we're working on, because we know our government is not doing that job for us. And so next slide. And so then we have the EPA rule, says 218 U.S. chemical plants must reduce toxic emissions that are likely to cause cancer. I put this here just in talking about environmental impacts to our community. One, I think this ruling was really important for those who had not heard about this ruling. Essentially deemed the Han rule. This came out in April, so right at 3 months ago. A lot of organizations like Earthworks, like CL, like Rise St. James, and so many, I can't even name them all, have done the work to really educate the community what this could mean for the future of Louisiana. And so just in talking about how EPA is actually taking up some of our comments that we've really pushed back on the narratives within these comment periods to be able to really put the pressure there to tell them, look, we know that our facilities are not being regulated properly. We know that we can't even get proper air monitoring in at a fourth, much less any of the facilities that are currently standing in the state of Louisiana. And so now that we've got this ruling to kind of say, these are the U.S. chemical plants that we are watching and that are under the microscope, what can we do to bring legislation that marries and kind of comes upon this decision of the EPA ruling in April. And so we've really been trying to do some grassroots organizing solely around what the Han rule means and how it can really propel us forward in the state of Louisiana when talking about stopping petrochemical build out. And of course, helping our legislators, and I have to like smirk because it's just so frustrating when helping our legislators and our lawmakers understand that carbon capture and storage is not the solution and is not an alternative for your typical petrochemical build out or LNG, so on, but instead is just doing the exact same thing, if not worse, when talking about the amount of emissions being put into the environment. We've got the science to back us. We've got some of the most major universities and law clinics that are really helping us provide cover here and helping our lawmakers understand that if we sign anything else that says that we can't continue with petrochemical build out, we are saying yes to more cancer rates of cancer, more respiratory illnesses, and more issues around maternal health care. Next slide. And so Air Products announced this $4.5 billion blue hydrogen clean energy complex in Ascension, right? And I remember exactly where I was. I think a great deal of us were in DC at the time. And I wanted to put this slide here because it's such a turning point when talking about environmental justice in the state of Louisiana, especially in a parish like Ascension, right? I've been a resident of Ascension right at 5 years now. My husband's from Ascension, grew up in Ascension, and the area in which we reside, Geismar, has actually been deemed the most toxic town or city in the state of Louisiana at this point. And so when you look at all of that data and you look at the facts here, and you still have a governor that is pushing, or agencies that are pushing for air products to be able to be built with this idea that it's clean energy, it really blows your mind, and it really just kind of brings into context this moment where I think a lot of folks were under the impression that we were moving towards really understanding that we are on the 2030 timeline. And then right when this decision dropped, right when Governor John Bel Edwards basically issued his statement around supporting the blue hydrogen complex right in Geismar, Gonzales, for instance. I'll go through all that in a second to kind of give you an understanding of just how large this complex would be. But essentially, it appears it's already so inundated that it accounts for a great deal of the cases that we see in Shriners when talking about kids' cancer, et cetera. Or in the local hospital that we have in Baton Rouge that partners with Shriners and St. Jude. But to see this decision still come down after all of this data being dropped is just alarming. And so I'll start here by saying this is one of our main projects that we work against. Air Products is a very large complex that will span across five or six parishes that essentially packed hundreds of thousands of people. And we can move to the next slide just because I'll kind of get into the map around it. And Taylor did a great job of explaining this. I won't be duplicative here, but just essentially this idea that you can capture CO2 and then permanently store it under the ground. It's not going to go anywhere. Nothing's going to move. We're not going to have earthquakes. Our bodies of water, and mind you, we're all basically on swampland anyways, but essentially our bodies of water would not, quote unquote, play a role in this sequestration process. Is just wild, even as we're seeing this play out in real time in some of our parishes that already have some of the wildlife management centers that I'm going to speak about. And so this is just a really good graph to kind of understand the flow of CO2 being captured hypothetically, and what is essentially designed to do, even though, of course, we know that it's never been proven to actually be effective, that ammonia is captured and stored permanently under the ground. Next slide. And we could do one more, sorry. And I guess I could speak to that last slide too. Essentially, this idea of carbon capture's storage and sequestration would initially cause pipeline ruptures, cause earthquakes or the ground to move or shift. When talking about parishes that are already inundated with hurricanes that often have to rebuild, communities that always have to rebuild, it's just far too dangerous to take this risk with a plant that we know is not going to be successful in storing carbon capture or doing carbon capture and storage. And so as you see this map, it's so brilliant. I have to thank Daryl Matalik-Wiley with Sierra Club because he got me onto this map a couple years ago and I use it in all of my presentations. But essentially the plant would be built right here in this Burnside area, which is on that left-hand side. It's kind of the star on the left-hand bottom side of the screen, and then would span through St. John, St. James, through Pipeline, and then into Lake Maurepas Preservation Society, which technically sits or is a body of water that is in two different parishes, Livingston and Tangipahoa. And we've seen a lot of action around this particular plant. And I'll use this as an example because we're kind of using it as a blueprint to stop the other carbon capture and storage plants that we are working actively in coalition to stop. But essentially, as you see, as large as this plant is, this is why I say hundreds of thousands of folks would be affected as a result. Just within Ascension Parish alone, where I reside, there is an opportunity for pipeline ruptures. And we are, like most parishes, volunteer fire departments. And so essentially we'll be looking to our fire departments to save hundreds of thousands of lives. And that's just not feasible when talking about carbon capture or talking about CO2 pipelines and the potential for it to rupture. It's such a large pressure. And so just in looking at this graph, it kind of just gives you a great idea of how many people would be affected and why it's so extremely important to stop this bad boy. And so next slide. And then here, it was just kind of a slide I added for context. I know a lot of folks have probably come to the call around some of the work that Rise St. James has done and St. James Parish in general. And so this kind of just gives you an idea of how where those pipelines would kind of be situated within St. James Parish. And we had a meeting at a boat club last year to kind of organize residents in St. James to talk about this. And we use this slide to better help them understand, because even though they do enjoy Lake Maurepas Preservation as well, or Lake Maurepas Swamp Management Center as well, they also have their own boat club that launches from St. James to that area. And so this was just a slide that we put in there to kind of explain, again, the many wetlands that would be affected as a result of this plant being constructed, but pipelines being situated, as well as the sequestration under the actual swamp. Next slide. Yeah. And so experts raise concern about unmarked grave sites. And so just kind of leaning in, oh my gosh, sorry, y'all, just kind of leaning in on the organizing that's happening, particularly in Ascension Parish around this plant, and why it's so extremely important for us to highlight some of the really relative points here. So we had an article drop a couple months back, and with Rise St. James, with Earthworks, with many others, Sierra Club, Delta Shots, or Healthy Gulf, as well. And we basically are trying to uplift the concerns around an unmarked grave site on that Air Products 4.5 billion hydrogen plant area. So exactly where they would be constructing the plant is where we have realized that there will be enslaved grave sites or burial sites, if you will. And typically in the state of Louisiana, the way that it works, you would think that plantation sites and sites that are considered sacred, such as ancestral grave site grounds, would not be something that you can touch or that you can build on or that you construct on. But unfortunately, we have found there are a lot of loopholes within our system, and folks are still able to put plants on grave sites of those that were once, working the lands of our sweet Louisiana. And so we are working in tandem with our coalition partners to utilize or highlight this orange grave plantation strategy, as I like to call it, where we've come in and we've said, look, we've identified residents in the community within Ascension Parish that are very disturbed, that we want to put a $4.5 billion industry where their loved ones, where their ancestors are buried. And so this is one of the many strategies that we are using to highlight the concern for industry over people, and why it's been extremely important these last couple of months that we've used as an organizing opportunity to meet so many residents that weren't even aware that this plant was being built or that pipelines were being constructed in order to facilitate a potential sequestration in Lake Maurepas. And so really just trying to hit home that this will affect us in different ways, whether historically, whether someone who enjoys the water of Lake Marpra, or any of the other pieces, St. James Boat Club, et cetera, and just trying to do our due diligence to help folks understand, like, you may think you're not touched in this moment, but you will be touched at some point. And so next slide, please. And so I'll just kind of give a quick timeline here just around some of the work that we've done in Ascension. And so the announcement of air products started right around 2021. Spring of 2022 is kind of when we launched with Louisiana Against False Solutions, local site fights, if you will. So just really carving out who's going to be on, running point for what site around carbon capture and storage. Is that was kind of right around the time right after air products was announced. So many different others were, and we've been keeping a running list of those different plants. And so we formed the Louisiana Against False Solutions Coalition. From there, we participated in hearings with Louisiana Department of Natural Resources, with LDEQ, which was around permitting for testing seismic wells in Lake Marpra and obtaining permits. In spring of 23, we really went back to a grassroots approach here, right? So really getting the folks in St. James and Livingston Parish and Tangipahoa involved in the organizing strategy, knocking on doors, using one-pagers provided by our partners to help them understand these are the health impacts, these are the impacts around pipeline ruptures, here's where we are in terms of our lack of safety and lack of public safety that's already put in place by our firefighter department, or lack thereof. Because if you ask anybody any day, it's really difficult for a firefighter to even come out right now any day with just like a random call, much less if there was an actual emergency that required pipeline safety and those measures being put in place. And so then we went to the Louisiana legislature last session of 2023, advocated against anti-CCS bills, went on to participate in the EPA primacy hearings, received the terrible news of Louisiana getting awarded primacy this spring, and then petitions are now ramping up in our community of Ascension. And I want to say that loud and clear, because Ascension is, as many of the folks may not know on the call, one of the wealthiest parishes in the state of Louisiana. So we really don't have like this argument that, like, necessarily folks are impoverished or not seeing the fruits of their labor. And so why should they run away from industry? So we really have to come harder with other things around health impacts, around pipeline safety, around ancestral grave sites, to help folks understand that it's important for them to also be at the table. And as such a parish with so much privilege, why not advocate across the board here? And so we've launched some petitions, and I'll speak about a couple of those, primarily with the Sorrento primary parents. And when I say that, Sorrento Primary School is a school situated in Ascension Parish that will be directly impacted, as the carbon capture and storage facility that Air Products has to construct would literally be within a very close radius to the school, in close proximity to the school, and close proximity to the residents. So we really have had to come at that angle of pipeline safety for them. And then St. James has launched their petition, like Marpra Preservation Society has launched theirs. And here we are in spring summer of 2024, where we've gone through legislative session once again. Didn't get too many wins out of that, I won't lie to y'all, but are now looking to the local level to be able to pass ordinances and resolutions and push back on local government, who also play a role in these decisions. And I'll also share with y'all, even though it's kind of, kind of behind the scenes, we are working with Ascension Parish Council to come up with a actual study that will be rooted in science and rooted in facts and data, and share with Ascension Parish residents the other side of those arguments that industry has already presented to them, and said that, this is safe. Carbon capture and storage is the new wave. Everyone's doing it. It's effective. We are meeting that with grassroots efforts and pulling in our best scientists, our best attorneys, to come up with a presentation that says the truth. And so we're doing that this fall. And so moving on to the next slide. And speaking more about Ascension, and again, folks will get the list. I won't list all of them, but just to name a few, Air Products is really our biggest baby, right? That we're trying to stop at Ascension and on to Livingston Tangipahoa. From there, CF Industries, Venture Global, Lake Charles Methanol, Geismar Ammonia. We've added someone since I've last created this presentation, Clico Denbury, Geismar Ammonia, Clean Hydrogen Works, which Taylor mentioned already. And the list is long, y'all, and it's growing every single day. And so we're really trying to be strategic in the way that we are getting the message out to folks that this is not a good idea. then it's extremely important for us as Ascension Parish residents, as the ones that everyone kind of looks to for the approval or disapproval of industry, just because we know so many households are households that are either employed by industry or know someone that's employed by industry. It's extremely important that our messaging is on point and speaks to the data and the science. One thing I have noticed just with my experience in Ascension, which was one of the things I was to talk about today, is we've even spoken to industry boys. We've knocked on their doors and they've said, we know this is a farce. We know that, I won't say what some of them said because it's kind of explicit, but some of them were just like, we know that this is not the way to go. And we are too nervous, but we've got to put food on our table, but we are willing to sign petitions to speak about the pipeline safety and speak about the measures that need to be put in place if they are in fact going to do this. And so next slide. And then one of our really cool organizing opportunities over the last course of the last several months, we were able to knock on doors last summer and into this summer with a new petition, but with this last one, Say No to Carbon Waste Injection in Louisiana. I am proud to say, along with our Louisiana Against False Solutions coalition partners, so many people were driven to a comment period, to an in-person hearing, downtown Baton Rouge last summer, where we had 3 to 4 days to come and lend our voice. It was so important that we had people from Ascension Parish, and we did. And we were very strategic and intentional about making sure that we turned out in Ascension, Livingston, Tangipahoa, some of these parishes that are deemed conservative and friendly to industry, but are very much opposed to carbon capture and storage, as it will restrict their usage of some of their most favorite bodies of water in which they have built their retirement homes on. And so we were able to garner the support, send public comment, but also bring people to Baton Rouge and have them speak in person and say, we do not want the state to receive primacy. We know if the state receives the ability to basically say yes to everyone, it will be very hard to put that genie back in the bottle. And so we turned out hundreds, thousands of comments on the internet. Unfortunately, Louisiana still was awarded primacy, and so we're working around that. But for the most part, we know that at least informed us that what we were doing was on message and in tandem with our residents, who may not necessarily be super vocal all the time about their worries or qualms about carbon capture and storage, but are definitely looking at it, reading the paper, and wanting in on the organizing strategy. And so definitely was a good opportunity for us there. Next slide. And then this is just a few photos of Logan, who's one of our coalition partners, and then 2 residents from Baton Rouge that spoke last year. Next slide. And then also we've had community meetings. And so we are kind of working behind the scenes right now. We were denied the request for hearing around carbon capture storage plant, namely Air Products, blue hydrogen plant in Ascension Parish. But of course they have to apply for multiple permits. And so we know while we have been denied those first 2 or 3 hearings around the permits for residents to come and weigh in on the local level in the state of Louisiana, namely as Ascension residents, we are going to keep pushing and pressing LDEQ to give us a request for hearing so that we can get in front of our local officials and tell them we do not want this plant. We had a community meeting last summer. We'll have another one in a couple weeks, and we'll keep having those as much as possible to really get out in the Louisiana heat and talk to folks about the importance of stopping Air Products. And last year, I just put a couple photos on here of the folks that attended the community meeting, which really launched and propelled forward our town halls that we started happening in Ascension Parish, which again is a very difficult parish to organize in with so many people that have in the past or historically been pro-industry, but now have kind of turned a new leaf and are interested in organizing around stopping CCS. And so we're going to keep bucking the system and doing what we can to get that hearing. Next slide. And so this is a new petition, and I am so grateful for our friends at Healthy Gulf. And I saw it coming through my email. I was like, yes, yes, yes. And so it speaks to Louisiana does not need another ammonia plant. Of course, around Air Products, blue hydrogen plant in Ascension Parish, and this will go directly to our Ascension Parish followers, as well as our parents of this Central Primary School and those who've been organizing on a grassroots level. And so don't let the Corps permit another ammonia facility in Cancer Alley. Communities in Cancer Alley cannot handle any more industrial facilities. Please tell the Army Corps that this ammonia plant would place an undue burden on Ascension Parish and that a public hearing must be held to hear from that community. And so again, we're just doing everything we can to get a public hearing. I will certainly drop this in the chat for folks. Anybody can sign it, y'all. If you've got some friends and family on the call and then some friends and family that live in Ascension Parish, we'd love to have them sign this petition. And I will be sending this out to the masses. But again, just kind of really just exemplifying how important it is to keep asking for one until they give it to us. Next slide. And then last, I will leave y'all with this. And so this is kind of just the 3 buckets in which we kind of compartmentalized all of our work so that we're not, inundating ourselves and like overwhelming ourselves because it's a lot. But this is kind of how we organize here. We know there's kind of 3 strategies just within my work alone. I work with Logan Wolf, who's also at Earthworks. And so our job is to speak with Sorrento primary parents, keep them organized, meet with them often. And of course, Sorrento is an Ascension Parish right next to Gonzales and Donaldsonville, Darrow area. And so we have done our due diligence in really holding space for those parents that are concerned about their elementary age children who would be going to school right next to this facility. And then our other bucket of work is that Orange Grove Plantation Descendants group, which we work directly with Rise on this and just really have brought so many folks of color, which has been so phenomenal to see us kind of take back our power, if you will, around this strategy of saying, we built this state, we built this land. We know that our ancestors are buried here, and we would like to see this land deemed as sacred land and not have a carbon capture and storage plant built on it. And so that is one other group that we organize. And then last but not least, and this is something that kind of came up recently, which has been really cool. I hate to say that out loud, but it's been really cool. Ascension Parish has been dealing with a red dust problem for over 2 years now with a local plant. I forget the name, excuse me, but I've just kind of been alerted by different groups across Ascension Parish that are annoyed by this plant that keeps just allotting for red dust to be over cars. I have a sister-in-law, brother-in-law that live in this neighborhood, Pelican Crossing, and I don't even go to their house anymore because my asthma gets so bad when I cross over into this part of the parish, and the red dust is just deemed, just everywhere, y'all. It's pretty gross. But one thing that has come out of it, aside from folks being angry and frustrated and have kind of organized themselves around this red dust and the plant that they've really pushed back on and tried to hold accountable, is the opportunity for us to organize around air products. And so we've literally done some online to offline organizing to basically say, hey, we know that you're upset about this red dust. Imagine all these other particulate matters and all this other these other chemicals and emissions that are being released into the environment that you don't even know about or that you know about, and then you need to do something about. Let's organize around this together. And so finding like some common ground where we're frustrated with a particular plant and really moving those folks over from the red dust conversation into one of the 2 groups that we have already established. And so that's been really effective. And our next meeting for both groups happen in 2 weeks. And so I'll make sure that folks have that information around that. But that's just kind of like the way that we've kind of compartmentalized the work that Earthworks is doing solely around air products in the plant. And so I'll pause there because I know we're supposed to have time for questions. But I do appreciate y'all listening to me and for giving me the opportunity to speak on an issue that I'm certainly passionate about, which is stopping carbon capture and storage.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Caitlin. And thank you again, Taylor, for your presentations. So yeah, let's dive into some questions. I see one question here. I think, Taylor, you might know the answer for this one. What are the implications for using hydrogen ammonia as decarbonized fuel for maritime shipping? Ship emissions are a huge concern for port communities.
Yeah, first I will say that what do we mean by decarbonize? Because when we're talking about blue ammonia that is made from fossil fuels, namely fossil gas, and when we have talked about a lot, and there's plenty of reporting on this, that carbon capture and storage, which, the decarbonized ammonia process really hinges on for blue ammonia and blue hydrogen. If that's not working, which we don't think it will work because it has not been proven to work, then it's not really decarbonized, is it? It's just a new industry creation that is really the same thing. It's like the new form of gas. I'll also say that there's big implications for ocean pollution, as I mentioned in my presentation, that can actually be worse than some of the really nasty, like diesel and heavy fuel that is used for ships currently. And as I said, experts have said that ammonia tankers could really sterilize cubic miles of ocean. And it's hard to know, like with ammonia ships, like we haven't seen this before. So how are they utilizing that ammonia? What are the engines going to be doing? There's just so many unknowns. But if it means more ammonia getting into the ocean, which is likely, then that's a huge problem.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And then another question we got was, I think you both can answer your thoughts on this. Is there any level of ammonia production or use that is okay from an environmental justice perspective?
I would have to say no. I mean, not that we've seen or effectively, right? I think this idea, which I try not to like it too in the weeds on, but this idea that you can essentially capture carbon dioxide and then convert it into blue ammonia and then store it under the earth or under body of water. I don't know. I just have never seen it effectively done in terms of the amount of ammonia in the environment or impact thereof as a result of ammonia being present. I don't see where, and I see Kimberly Terrell's on the call too, so maybe she could help out here. But just within the studies that I've read and then the trainings that I've received from so many different law clinics and so many of our partners within the coalition, we've never talked about an acceptable amount of ammonia that would make sense or make this process work. And Taylor, you can correct me if you have another idea. Okay.
Okay, no correction there. I would just say that, yeah, ammonia in and of itself is toxic. Pure ammonia is highly toxic and is susceptible to leaks. While our current agricultural systems that have plenty of their own problems are highly dependent on ammonia, because of ammonia being the key ingredient for nitrogen fertilizer, it would be impossible today to stop all ammonia production because our current systems hinge on these chemical inputs. But for environmental justice, like there's no zone where you're producing ammonia, regardless of the color, where it's going to be safe for surrounding communities. There's no road where you can put ammonia on where it's going to be safe for drivers also on that road if there's crashes or anything like that. So there's no pipeline that doesn't go through communities that makes it safe. So yeah, it's a toxic substance. And while our current agricultural systems hinge on it, that definitely doesn't mean that we need to increase the production of it for other uses. I mean, that makes no sense. And I'll also say, ideally, we need to start getting better solutions than ammonia for our agricultural systems as well, and phasing that out as best we can. Last piece, and I'm like over answering here, so I'll make it quick, but there has been quite a bit of talk about decarbonized ammonia. So of course, blue ammonia is like an industry example of that, but we disagree that it's decarbonized because obviously we've said carbon capture and storage has not been proven to work. But there's also calls for green ammonia, especially in agriculture. That's ammonia made 100% from renewable energy and water. But I will say that regardless of the color, ammonia is still toxic, and you're still going to have these problems of pollution in waterways, dead zones, dumping, all this kind of thing. So even if, we're excited, wow, this green ammonia, what a great color, we'll use that for agriculture. Well, it's still ammonia. So you're going to run into the same problems.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, thank you both. We are at time. And I know we have a ton of questions, so I'm going to share the questions that we have left and some of the answers from our speakers in the follow-up email. I also just dropped the link to our post-event survey in the chat. So if you could fill that out, let us know what you thought of today's event, what other questions you might still have, and what other event or spaces would be helpful for you in your work. That would be greatly appreciated. And again, big thank you to Caitlin and Taylor for taking the time to share your expertise and your knowledge with us today. Look forward to continuing the conversation, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate y'all.